Welcome to the Mike White Podcast, where I, Mike White, share my conversations and book reviews through my journey to learn all that goes on in this amazing world. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. If you're a regular listener of the podcast, you can support the show and help us grow by listening on Fountain, an awesome podcast app on iOS or Android. You can share your thoughts on this episode or simply say thanks by sending some sats with a comment. This is called the Boost. Getting started is easy. You can top up your Fountain wallet with a bank card or any Lightning wallet. Oh yeah, and you can earn sats just by listening on Fountain and being an active member of the community. Visit fountain.fm to learn more. Nothing on this podcast is financial advice. It's for educational and entertainment purposes only. With that, enjoy the show. All right, welcome back to the Mike White Podcast. Today, I am joined by Stimmy, a Bitcoin veteran. He was a former Army officer and is now a full-fledged Bitcoin maxi, laser-eyed maxi. I met him at Big Block Boom, which is a conference here in Austin, Texas. Next year is going to be in Dallas. And just had a really good conversation. And thanks for coming on the pod, Stimmy.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. Yeah, BitBlock Boom is incredible. Highly recommend to everybody out there. I think this was my third year there, and it's crazy the quality of people you meet and the conversations you have.
Yeah, definitely high signal. And you were telling me about back then how you were wanting to write a piece about Bitcoin and the military and how much interconnection there is between the two. And last month you emailed over your post on, people can find it on Habla. I'll have it in the show notes, and it's called Bitcoin for the Veteran Soul. So I definitely want to get your story and then roll into why you wrote that and what all that is about. But wanted to start out with, who are you and where you're from and what your backstory is.
Yeah. I'm a simple man from the northern Great Plains, one of the states that some people have heard of, but nobody's visited, which is kind of nice. Grew up on a farm out here. Got into Bitcoin in 2014 while I was still in the military, and didn't really begin doing my work to understand it until 2019, and then fell fully down the rabbit hole. And so that was after I got out of the military that I fell down the rabbit hole. And I think as I've gone through a lot of introspection and hearing other people's stories, thinking about my own, recognized how Bitcoin exploration really helped me better think through my military experiences, how to integrate those into my new life and build new hope for the future.
I totally understand. I think if people are new to Bitcoin, they think there's no way that can go that deep. Like it's just it's a cryptocurrency, number go up. It's cool, but I think once you start diving down the rabbit hole, you get to see how deep it goes and how important it is. And I think one of the things that helps that is people in the military and like the reason they go into the military and how that's kind of connected to Bitcoin. So when did you decide, like, hey, I want to go serve my military as an Army officer?
It was actually September 11th. I was 12 when it happened, so I had a few years to wait. Getting into high school, I was over-involved, did every possible activity, football, band, speech, track, just everything. It was a small enough school that I could do that, which was great. Exposed myself to a lot of different things, a lot of team experiences that I think were great preparation for the military. But ultimately, I knew I wanted to do something. I figured if I didn't go, who would? Because I didn't have a lot of friends that were going in. It was during the Iraq surge, kind of before the financial crisis. So, A, the military looked scary, and B, there were still some decent looking opportunities in the private sector and college, that sort of thing. And I actually ended up enlisting in the National Guard.
Wow.
Yeah, right out of high school. Didn't have any close family members. I had a couple grandparents that had served in World War II, but never really heard very many stories from them. And so I figured the National Guard was kind of the lowest cost way to get in and figure it out. And I knew I wanted to go to college, followed my girlfriend to college at the time, and now we've been married for 12 years.
Congrats.
Um, yeah, pretty typical dumb young man thing to do, but it worked out. So I'm lucky just because she's amazing. And yeah, once I got into the Guard, enjoyed it. Did really well in basic training, and got into a decent unit with some really outstanding NCOs. Our mission set was kind of during a reset between National Guard deployments, so it was a little bit boring. And I knew I needed more excitement, so pursued the um, active Army commission through ROTC, and that's the way it went.
And so you're talking about how 9/11 impacted you and you saw America under attack. And what about America did you have at that time, like a conceptual understanding of why you thought it was special?
Yeah, I think it was personal to me knowing that my ancestors had come to the United States as homesteaders in the 1860s and 70s. They had, I mean, kind of lost track of some of that genealogy. I'm not sure what they were doing in Europe, but they certainly came over here with very little and then made it work on the land. And so I knew the country had provided opportunity that set my family up for some success, and it set me up for personal success. And I thought terrorists were assholes, and I thought it was pretty messed up to kill innocent people, and so I wanted to do something about it.
Yeah. And so you enter the military, you're there in college, you get a commission. And what's your first duty there as a young lieutenant there in the Army?
Yeah, I was an armor officer. Um, it's actually branch detail. So I had this arrangement from the get-go that I would spend a few years as a lieutenant in the armor branch, which is tanks and Cav Scouts. They need a lot of lieutenants. They don't need as many captains, just based on staff structures throughout the branch. So then at captain, I switched to intelligence. And so I got to see a couple different sides of the Army, the enlisted, the officer, the combat arms, the support. But I ended up at Fort Hood, Texas, which is, I think, the Army's second largest base in terms of head count. I picked it because I thought, and I actually got my first choice. I know you've talked to some other vets who did not get to choose where they went.
Yeah.
But I picked Fort Hood because at the time it was the best chance of leading tankers and driving around tanks or getting a reconnaissance platoon. So then I ended up getting neither of those things, and landed in the infantry, which ended up being a pretty great experience, actually, because met some great people and deployed to Afghanistan as a police advisor.
How was that your attitude going into Afghanistan, and how did that change over time as you moved on within the military?
Oh yeah. My attitude, I think, was like any young aggressive man, like ready to defend myself if I had to. My mission, I knew, was going to be advising Afghan police. I knew I wasn't going to be leading soldiers. We had a small advisory team. The focus was on closing bases down. This was the end of Operation Enduring Freedom.
Hmm.
So I wanted to give it my best. And so I went hard on reading about Afghanistan and taking the training very, very seriously. My unit actually had a pretty great train up compared to my second deployment. So we did a lot of drills. We focused on the threats we would face. And I went deep into books and history and talking with Afghans, learning some Pashto and Dari.
Whoa.
building the tools I would need to at least get over the initial barrier of creating rapport in a foreign culture. And so I came into it with that mindset, just ready to go, wired up, and then got over there, and I certainly wasn't disappointed. Got there in the middle of the fighting season, had a kind of rocky transition with the unit we replaced. Very fast-paced mission of closing bases. The Taliban wanted to, well, the Haqqani network, where I was in particular, wanted to create a narrative that they had kicked the Americans out, so they wanted to take as many of us as they could. And of course, we didn't want to give them that propaganda victory. So it was interesting. It was long days. I actually went in like the best physical shape of my life too for that first deployment. And when I got back, I was in just about the worst shape of my life, just of how busy it was and living conditions declining as we closed the base, that sort of thing. And it was kind of cool too. I got to do the police advising for a few months, and then when we closed our first base, I was actually reassigned as the executive officer of an infantry company. So I got to go lead troops again and do a totally different mission set, which was a nice variation, I would say.
Yeah, and I think a big thing when you're serving in the military, you want to have that purpose objective clearly known, and you want to know that the leadership that is giving you this objective is moral, just, and knows what they're doing. And I saw in your post of the Bitcoin for the veteran's soul, it sounds like you kind of started losing trust in that leadership. When did that happen?
I had my first hints of incentive misalignment for senior leaders actually in the National Guard. I had a brigade commander who got in trouble, and it was bad enough the Army actually used his case as a reason to overhaul the entire officer evaluation system. And then in my first deployment, we were working for a one-star general who was living a swinger lifestyle,
Jeez.
downrange, just a complete abuse of trust. Clearly not focused on the mission. But he was just that one bad apple. And we didn't have to work directly for him in every capacity because we still had our battalion and brigade chain of command doing its own thing. But that was kind of my first hint of it. I had some really, really great commanders, though. I was very blessed as lieutenant to have like a commander who received the Distinguished Service Cross in Iraq for jumping on a grenade, and another commander
Jeez.
who had been to that exact AO where we were deployed to, and some people who really knew their stuff. So I was still pretty positive on the Army, I would say, as a lieutenant. And then, like I mentioned in that article, it was really the second deployment where I got far more burned out.
Yeah, and I think specifically they were talking about how they altered your report and trying to make things, instead of taking ownership and being accountable for whatever the situation was, they wanted to make it look nice and look pretty, and is all about their image and perception rather than the mission. I don't know if you could add any more to that.
Yeah, I mean, as I know you saw it in the Navy too, the up or out promotion system that the military still has, kind of a remnant of the industrial age, the 1950s, where promotions are primarily based on time and grade, and then performance and results are secondary. That second deployment, I had retrained as an intelligence officer and ended up responsible for really the same region of Afghanistan. And so I was writing reports that were going up to the White House and summarized with others and other NATO capitals. They were fairly important reports. They were really like the scoreboard for the direction of the war. And there were some colonels who wanted to look better to their own bosses. And so they changed the contents of my report to paint a rosy picture. Pretty messed up stuff. That's where I quickly began to lose trust.
And I think it happens way more than it should have. And I mean, and it's little things too. Like I never saw anything that serious in my time, but we would have inspections, and some, it depends. Like I had two different COs, and there was one CO that was definitely more, okay, this inspection, we gotta just change all our normal operating procedures and do extra cleaning and do this whole show for these people when it's not actually how we operate. And it's really frustrating. I think that's one thing I wish uh, the military would be better at. What are there any other things you think that how the Army could improve?
Yeah, that's one I've thought about, and it's a hard one to answer because if I I kind of put myself back in those shoes when I was in, and my view of the world, my view of the military at that time versus my view of the military now and my view of foreign policy. I think getting rid of the time component to promotions and making it more about results would be a step closer toward a meritocracy. It's hard to do, though, I realize, because of the reality of assignments. The military still has to maintain a credible deterrent force, training at home, refitting equipment. I mean, obviously, experiences in the Navy, you might spend an entire few years overhauling a ship.
Yeah.
The Army is similar. A person might spend 3 or 4 years at a home station aligned with some Northcom or Southcom mission, or rotating through Europe, versus people who get to do the exciting stuff and get all those good resume bullets in an active theater of war. So I don't know the answer for how to fix the Army, but I think one challenge the Army has uniquely is a lack of identity. The Marine Corps obviously are our best friends on the land and at sea too. I mean, they have a strong identity. They're good at marketing. The Army is just far more schizophrenic. It has so many low density MOSs, and it needs those to sustain land operations over large areas. But there's a guy named Christian Craighead, who's a former British SAS leader, also nicknamed Obi-Wan Nairobi, and he framed it, I think, the best way from that warfighter perspective, which is that a country can only afford one military, and that military is responsible for deterrence and achieving overmatch when deterrence fails. So the question a country should ask itself is whether it wants a military where people get great life skills, they get good job training, they become well-adjusted members of society afterward, or should that country want a military full of 18 to 22-year-old murderous psychopaths? And honestly, I would wager from that perspective that it's better to have the young psychopaths and deal with the costs later, because they're going to be more likely to achieve overmatch and ensure national survival in the very short term. But now, as a Bitcoiner, falling more into libertarian thought, I really question the utility of a military as a foreign policy tool, or at least America's reliance on it as such. It's a lot of introspection, a lot of thinking about what I did in the past and what I want to see opportunities for my kids. I certainly would not encourage them to join the military with my current thinking.
I agree with you there, and I think I have a definitely not a common view, but I respect the hell out of the Marines and the Army, like putting themselves at risk, and they really believe they're fighting for freedom, fighting for something, huge. It's good for their family. But I don't think we need that right now. Like, we've gotten to the point where we have so many advanced weapons, so many robots, and if someone really is a threat, I would prefer we, as much as we can, we don't risk American lives, and we take care of the threat, however, by whatever means necessary, and deal with it that way. I don't like this nation building stuff and putting troops on the ground that just statistically they're not all coming back. It's impossible.
Yeah, and it's to fight other people's wars. I mean, a more isolationist perspective, if somebody wants to call it that, is very appealing. When somebody is personally familiar with the sacrifices made.
Yeah, for sure. So that's some of the downsides of the military, but it still serves a great I mean, I think country has to have military, and it's I respect the people that go and fight for freedom. What were some of the things you're most thankful for of your time in the Army?
Yeah, I'm thankful for a lot, actually, and it's been quite an evolution in my thinking this year. Um, I was very, very dark on it the last couple of years, especially after the Afghanistan collapse. But I'm really grateful for the people that I met and got to build friendships with from across the country, exposure to their subcultures, since America is just a land of so many different cultures. Got to see different parts of the country, got to enjoy a lot of adrenaline rushes. I grew up hunting and shooting, so got to play with some pretty cool guns and explosives, which honestly, it's not so dissimilar to some of the conversations you've had with some other guys on the podcast about the value of combat sports, the confidence that comes with the ability to defend oneself. I think I'm a better father in some ways after experiencing all that. And honestly, I would probably be a better officer too now with some more years of being a father. But yeah, definitely grateful for memories, for friendships, for teamwork, leadership experience, gained some technical skills. I really had probably more fun than not, to be honest, but it's just the depth of some of those bad experiences were so much worse.
Yeah, and you write about that in the habla post, which I thought could be very valuable because I know a lot of people have seen this very similar things, and I can't imagine how to shift from that high intensity environment to civilian life. And so, what was your experience? I know you're also learning about Bitcoin while you're in the military, but eventually you decide, okay, hey, I'm getting out. I'm going to transition to the civilian world. How did you do that, and what recommendations do you have for people that are going through that right now?
Yeah, like I mentioned in the post, I made every possible mistake. I put in the paperwork for separation while I was still in Afghanistan. I actually had some suicidal ideations on that second deployment. Um, that was some pretty strong motivation to just get out as soon as I could to start improving my mental health. And of course, I couldn't seek help on that deployment because I was an officer, and there's part of Army culture, especially in combat arms units, where officers just don't get help. Um, and I was a deployed intelligence officer. My security clearance was at risk. I wasn't sure if I would want to continue in national service, so I wanted to retain the security clearance. But the timeline essentially worked out where I had 10 business days after getting back to clear out of the Army, turn in all my equipment, get a DD-214 and sign out on terminal leave. And obviously 10 days would be enough for a private sector role, but it's not for something as slow and bureaucratic as the Army. So
Not at all.
didn't have time while deployed to network for jobs back home. I knew business school was attractive, but couldn't exactly study for the GMAT when I was working 18 hours a day and just focused on survival. So I would say for folks getting out, use every minute of time you have before that sign out, whether it's a skill bridge internship or taking transition training seriously. Like the Army at the time was offering remote training for separating service members, and it's kind of the standard, hey, here's how you build a resume, here's how you search job boards, very rudimentary stuff. So I would say skill development, networking, reflection on goals, and reflection on values as well, since values will factor into decisions. But for me, it was more of oh shit, I just thought about killing myself. How do I get out of here as fast as I can? Thankfully, my wife had a pretty good job as a teacher. Some fairly decent compensation for that, since she had a little bit of experience already. So we had an income stream. I wasn't in a huge rush, so I was able to enjoy terminal leave and then kind of start taking the search seriously. But yeah, I would say just use every minute. Thankfully, there's a lot of good resources out there now. bullish as hell on Operation Bitcoin that Gabe Lord is running. He's part of that Bitcoin veterans group that's really active on Twitter. He's looking at how to connect veterans with jobs in Bitcoin specifically, skill training, that sort of thing. So yeah, take advantage of those things.
I'll have that linked in on the show notes. So if anyone wants to check out Operation Bitcoin, I follow Gabe on Twitter and LinkedIn. And he's really good on a good mission there, spreading the word. But I definitely want to touch on something that I think is still often overlooked and so important, is just the mental health aspect of people in the military. And just, I mean, throughout my life, I've seen people succumb to that urge, or that, way more often than I would hope to see in anyone's lifetime. And just, what do you think are some resources, or if anyone's feeling that way, how to get out of that?
Yeah, it varies for everybody, but I'm sorry you've experienced that too, Mike, seeing it in friends, and it's common. I mean, the military likes to get people before their prefrontal cortex is formed for a reason. They tend to get out after it's formed, and so their view of the world has changed. And I would just encourage anybody who is struggling with the transition or afterward to go to the VA, to be honest. I know it gets a bad rap, but it's there, it's free. I've had a pretty great experience. Actually, it's been quite impressive, although part of me is still questioning the value of state provided resources, or federal resources in this case, but give it a try. Seek out connection, stay in touch with people you served with. I heard a guy, what's his name? Dan Orth, I believe, was a Special Forces veteran. I've heard him on a couple of podcasts. He's written poetry, but he had what he called a dead hooker friend, somebody he would call to take care of life's worst problems. And so he made an agreement with friends that he wouldn't kill himself without touching base with them first, because the depth of those friendships in the military are harder to acquire, or they're out of reach in the civilian world in a lot of ways. So stay in touch with people you served with.
Yeah, definitely reach out to anyone. If Reach out to me, like, if you don't have anyone, someone. And
Yeah, exactly. Me too. I mean, open invite to anybody who listens to this. If you're going through something, I've been through it too, and I'm not a provider of mental health services, but happy to listen anytime.
yeah, so those are, I mean, some of the darkest days anyone could face. And you transition, you end up going to an MBA program. How does Bitcoin play into this, and how much more optimistic, just in life in general, are you once you start learning about Bitcoin?
Yeah, Bitcoin changed everything. It took time. I missed the 2017 bull market on deployment, so I got back during the bear market, and so I bought a little bit more Bitcoin at that time. Got into trading some shit coins. Wanted to do the MBA so that I could learn about different functions in the business world. I didn't know anything about accounting. My undergrad was in economics. I didn't know anything about marketing, management practices, hiring, retention, compensation, just operating activities, financing activities, really basic stuff. So the MBA was helpful for that. And since I was dabbling in Bitcoin, I ended up surfing through some crappy crypto podcasts, and then eventually landed on Preston Pish's podcast. I'd been into stock picking as well. So the investor podcast, and watching Preston's journey from a deep value guy to a laser-eyed maxi was enlightening to me too. And then the content in business school, being able to talk about discount rates and question where they come from, and is the treasury really risk-free when we're also talking about political risk in some other classes and international context. So I actually became a maximalist during business school and the COVID response. Tried to orange pill as many people as I could in school. It was really running into those yuppie elite, like Croesus wrote about kind of famously in the Bitcoin
That's a good
social
article.
circle. Yeah. So yeah, it helped me become more hopeful too, because I learned from classmates in the MBA about their career journeys through big Fortune 500 companies and nonprofits, and some of the, I wouldn't say hopelessness, but just the limitations that were placed on their careers, the constraints of golden handcuffs that they were all seeking. And I wanted something totally different. I viewed freedom as part of wealth and probably the most important component. So Bitcoin,
Sorry, on that freedom aspect, I mean, I think a lot of people get into crypto for financial freedom. Like they think, oh, if this goes to the moon, I can convert it to dollars and I'll be living the high life. So what type of freedom do you mean when you're talking about Bitcoin?
it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of the purchasing power freedom.
Yep.
But it's really just the nature of the UTXO set and key management, having sats under my control, not being subject to the whims of a third party. The mobility that comes with that, the ability to leave the country if shit hits the fan and take everything with me. And then that orientation on the future too. And I wrote about it in the essay. It's the military was very high time preference, just getting through every day, and the fiat rat race, the business school world too. It's about chasing a grade, having a successful semester, and then graduation, and getting the right job, and all that stuff. Whereas when my savings is in Bitcoin, my unit of account is Bitcoin, I know it's going to be there in the future, and probably with higher purchasing power. I can take different risks. I can take more risks or less, just kind of depends on what it is. But yeah, I just love that hopefulness for the future.
Yeah, the inflation aspect of people chasing these wages or the salaries, and there's no way, from what I've been seeing, that these salary increases are keeping up with inflation. And Bitcoin provides that off ramp to a better system that I know people are scared of it, but I really think a deflationary type of currency, fixed supply is superior to fiat.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to watch people's purchasing power slip through their fingers, to see whole countries shifting toward a modern day version of feudalism, it's pretty depressing. So it's nice to opt out and have something totally different that liberates us from it.
Yeah. What were some of your concerns? So you were learning about Bitcoin through Preston Pish's podcast. It was kind of your big orange pill moment. What other resources do you really like to learn about it?
Yeah, I think I discovered Bitcoin Twitter along a similar timeline, hearing Preston and his guests plug their Twitter accounts. And I had created an account back in college, but really never used it. So kind of followed some FinTwit, since I was still a bit of a stock picker at the time in 2019. But then it was helpful to catch news as it broke and to eventually find more Bitcoiners. And I think I found I can't remember what list, but I found a list of like cypherpunks that were on Twitter. So started following Adam back and got challenged to think about it more technically too. Then started just listening to pretty much every Bitcoin podcast I could find. Stefan Livera was great. Marty and Matt with their whole family of podcasts has been great. Just the lifestyle I lead now with kids, podcasts are great for doing chores, doing yard work, walking around. So there's been such an explosion of channels for Bitcoin content. I've tried to keep up with the ones that work, and it's been very helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Podcasts. I love books. I love the Bitcoin Standard. but
Yeah.
it takes a little longer. You got to be really dedicated to sit down and dive into a book when you could just have podcasts streaming into your ear wherever you go. And that's one thing I found common in a lot of people I've interviewed is they've been having jobs where they can just listen to podcasts all day and they get down the rabbit hole really fast.
Yeah, that is a huge bonus when, I mean, obviously those sorts of jobs, maybe they suck because they're not so stimulating in the moment, but if you can do a little time theft and reinvest it into something with a positive ROI, that's great.
Oh, definitely. So what are some of the concerns that you initially have or still have about Bitcoin? And have you qualmed that anxiety?
Yeah, I think, being in the Army, I had, like I mentioned, I'd kind of gained a few technical skills just with the systems we used, but those are a far cry from the cutting edge in the private sector. And so I was concerned about quantum computing, and I kind of bought into that FUD a little bit, and artificial intelligence, and what if SHA-256 is broken and the UTXO set becomes compromised and private keys are hackable, or supercomputers come online and the rate of issuance increases and attackers hit the chain that way. But then learning about the difficulty adjustment and multi-sig and passphrases and different hardware involved for self-custody, it really calmed those fears, and any remnants of doubt I had were assuaged very quickly.
No, definitely. The the difficulty adjustment, if no one knows, that's why as more miners have the hash rate, so the amount of energy miners have been using to mine Bitcoin, which you would think if there was no difficulty adjustment, that means a lot more Bitcoin would be mined extremely faster. But it's built into the code that every approximately, I don't know, it's every so many blocks, which turns out to be about every 2 weeks.
Yeah, every 2016 blocks, and it can adjust by factors of 3. So if asteroid hits and hash rate drops precipitously, then difficulty can be cut 75% in a single adjustment or increased 200% should a Chinese quantum computer come online or whatever. So there are guardrails in place that will eventually prevent, an entire halving epoch from derailing the supply issuance.
Yeah, it's just so cool. And it's pretty amazing that Satoshi, I guess he wasn't the first crypto type currency or digital currency, but that he s- solved all these problems with such a simple, I don't know. I mean, it seems simple from what people say, but piece of code.
Yeah. Yeah, it's simple until you have to write the code, but since I'm not a developer, I'm wildly impressed by those who are. And I may have screwed up that 75% and 200% or whatever, but yeah, it's pretty wild to
Yeah,
know what people have thought through. And like, I haven't read as much of the old Bitcoin Talk forum as I would like, but you can look back on Bitcoin Talk and you can see Hal Finney and others, like they were solving problems in 2009 and 10 that are still attracting FUD today, and it's kind of ridiculous. But everybody learns, in different ways, different speeds, and that's the beauty of this thing being peer to peer, is that there is no central authority to tell us how it's going to work.
definitely. And that reminds me of what some people do or say when I say I love Bitcoin and I think it's better money. They start saying, "Oh, what about Dogecoin or Litecoin or all these other altcoins?" And it sounds like you went down that path at first. What kind of convinced you to just focus on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it was learning learning at a high level how open source software development works, and the number of commits and pull requests on a particular repo. I mean, there are so many more eyes on Bitcoin holding it accountable to reduce the supply chain risk of the software becoming malicious. And then there are, node in a box tools like Ronin Dojo, MyNode, and
Start nine.
Start 9. Yeah, there are just so many of those available now that you don't have to trust any particular developer team, and you can just keep going about your life. Whereas Ethereum has a foundation and Dogecoin has an identifiable founder. And I think part of it too came from learning about business and investment. And I just concluded that wealth is created through concentration and it's protected through diversification. So that's why I didn't want to diversify into cryptos. I just wanted to have the most honest money I could find before I begin really taking that capital allocation more seriously.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There is no second best, as Michael Saylor says.
Yeah.
And I wanted to touch a little more on your article as well, as I think everyone should go check it out on Habla. Will be in the show notes. But you talk about how veterans are more likely to take the orange pill than others. Why do you think that?
Yeah, I wrote about a few different things in the article. And maybe to highlight purpose, since we've talked about that part of military service, like young people who have a sense of purpose from an early age, that is a little bit different from the normal college grad or college student who just goes to party, or recent grad who just kind of chases a paycheck or a title. There's purpose in serving the world, essentially, by allowing this thing to monetize, by helping it monetize, um, by helping other people learn and get connected. I mean, I think that's part of a lot of veterans' experiences, being part of teams that they enjoy, teams they don't enjoy. Obviously, not every veteran resonates with the purpose of the military, but those who can at least resonate with the purpose of helping someone else, that's the beauty of Bitcoin, is by being greedy and accruing our own economic value to the network, it has network effects to benefit others too. And there's purpose too of taking capital out of the treasury market. I think that's how we raise the cost of war. I think that's how we make future wars unaffordable and avoidable, is by reducing the state's ability to debase the currency and fund wars. So if a policymaker wants to fight and has to do it on the basis of taxes, because all of the capital has been sucked into the system that can't be extracted from, then they're going to have a harder time sending young people off. And that's been a big part of my calculus, is I don't want my kids or their generation or just any other human being to go into those dark places that warfare puts people into.
Yeah, it's so true. It's that kind of moral hazard problem where there's no true economic cost. So you can say all these billions of dollars going here and there, but when you look at the national debt, that's a drop in the bucket, and
Yeah.
they'll just print more. They don't worry about it. It's not like they're having to actually ask the citizens for this money. It's all hidden in inflation, and with Bitcoin, that goes away.
Yeah. And then politicians are not chasing sound bites anymore. They're having to chase results and accountability. I think that fosters a better community inside of a country, and I think it fosters better decisions.
I don't know. I don't know if you ever think about this, but what do you think is the end game with our debt? Like, how does this all play out?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's the old World War II playbook. Maybe we're marching into World War III right now, and that's the plan. Wipe it out through destruction and jubilee and inflation. I sure hope not, but empires tend to collapse violently. The American Empire being a predominantly economic one. I don't know if that's going to make our history any different from Macedonians or Greeks or Ottomans or ancient China, or I mean, I don't know. you're more of an engineer and maybe I'm more of a historian by mindset, but yeah, I'm not optimistic that it's going to be a peaceful collapse if I allow myself to dwell on it too much, but I'm going to make it as peaceful as I can for myself and those around me and anybody I can reach.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't come to that. And I think Bitcoin provides one of the best solutions to that as an off ramp and a peaceful transition to sound money without violence. And but we'll see. Something happens. The politics, I don't see it on either side. No one's wanting to actually address the spending issue, and as long as that continues, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, hyperinflation just seems inevitable, but just not priced in.
Yeah. What about you wrote about the connection aspect of Bitcoin and being in the military. You said how there's camaraderie that attracts a lot of people, and it's hard to get that in the civilian life. How have you found connection in Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's meeting folks like you and others at conferences and online. I mean, conferences aren't necessarily for everybody. Some folks can't travel or or they're more wary of their privacy. They don't want to be seen on facial recognition cameras and that sort of thing. But no matter what, there's an opportunity to connect over shared ideals, to challenge values, to just constantly iterate on becoming a better human. And I think that's what Bitcoiners with a long time perspective are doing as individuals. And then, yeah, seeing that, sharing it, I think it's not, I hate the term Bitcoin community because I don't think it is a community, but I think it fosters community.
Yeah, it's not a community in that there's a lot of different thoughts and ideas, which I think is great. Is that
Yeah.
what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let the best ideas win or incorporate whatever the hell you want. I think, I mean, a lot of veterans saw it in action too. It's usually the junior enlisted guys who come up with the best ideas since they're the ones having to do the work. They may cut some corners ethically and with safety and that sort of thing. Maybe, that's what NCOs and officers there for guardrails. But I mean, ultimately the best ideas can come from anywhere. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin being a level playing field. Nobody has more influence over the network. Just spin up another node, spin up another ASIC. This thing's so much bigger than any one person or one group.
Yeah, but open source for all to see.
Yeah.
So I definitely want people to go to your Abla, go read that, go zap you some sats. I think it's really very well written and a good resource for any of the veterans out there transitioning or looking into Bitcoin. I wanna end it with your call to action, but do you have that you wrote in there? Do you have any other final thoughts before we close it out?
Well, just, wanted to check in on you too. Like how's life been? How's school? And we'd be back at BitBlock Boom. I know it's moving up to Dallas in April, but yeah, just kind of curious how you're doing.
Yeah, that's so when this releases, it's gonna be too late for everyone, but I
Yeah.
actually want to sign up today for the discounted rate to BitBlock Boom. I think it ends on the 30th.
It
But
does.
yeah, I plan to head up to Dallas in April, celebrate the halving, and it's been a good semester. People probably notice I'm not making as many podcasts, so trying to focus on what I'm going to do with work, and Bitcoin's not going anywhere. I'm still as passionate about Bitcoin as I've ever been, but the podcast has taken somewhat of a backseat than where it was before.
And you're running all those miles too.
Yeah, I got the marathon in 2 weeks, and I'll do a little marathon recap podcast if anyone actually listens to those. But I think it's great to. That's one thing too, which I heard on Blue Collar Bitcoin the other day, kind of reinforced it. I think it's great to work in Bitcoin. It's something I'm passionate about, and I would really enjoy working in Bitcoin. But maybe if that doesn't happen, I still can add value, be productive in the world. It's something I enjoy doing, and be a hardcore Bitcoiner on the side. So I'm still looking for other opportunities like that. But I think having the marathon to wake up every day, know I got to train, been doing cold plunges and staying staying productive is it's been a good few months since BitBlock Boom for sure.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Stimmy, for coming on the podcast. And the call to action for all you out there is stack sats, build meaningful relationships, reflect on your strengths, acquire new ones, and contribute to Bitcoin projects and educations as you are able. We're going to win, and the world will be better with you on board. Hoo-yah. All right. Thanks, Stimmy.
Yeah. Everything except the hoo-yah. Put that into the past. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was me.
No, yeah, just cheering for Bitcoiners, and yeah, here's hopes and prayers for I mean, obviously I know you're not a religious guy, but I am, and so prayers for a better world.
I'm all about it. So, all right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Mike White Podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mike White Pod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Y'all have a great day.